In September of 1552, an unparalleled danger loomed over Eger Castle, its ancient walls showing signs of decay. 40,000 Ottoman soldiers, having encircled the modest stronghold in northern Hungary, were poised for a siege. Captain István Dobó was acutely aware of his force's exact numbers. He commanded a mere 2,000 individuals, comprising not only warriors but also elderly residents, untrained peasants, women, and children. No reinforcements were anticipated. A relief army was nowhere in sight. King Ferdinand, from Vienna, dispatched letters filled with promises of aid, but these pledges amounted to nothing more than ink on paper. Confronted with a numerical disadvantage of 20-1, any rational commander would have contemplated surrender. However, Dobó grasped a critical reality. The fall of Eger would trigger the collapse of all northern Hungary like a row of dominoes. Kasa's silver and gold mines would fall into Ottoman hands, and the path to Vienna would be wide open.
Europe itself faced immutable change. The crucial question wasn't whether they could triumph, but rather how 2,000 people could achieve the impossible. Before we delve deeper, share your location and current time in the comments to demonstrate the breadth of our audience. Here's the question you should be able to answer by the end of this video. Was Eger's victory a miracle, pure luck, or the result of a brilliant defensive strategy previously unseen globally? To comprehend this, we must rewind to 1526, to a battle that irrevocably altered Hungary's destiny. On August 29, 1526, the Kingdom of Hungary perished on the field of Mohacs. This was not a metaphorical loss, but a literal one. Blood and bones were lost forever. In less than 2 hours, the Hungarian army was utterly annihilated by Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. 20,000 Hungarians lay dead on the battlefield. King Louis II, a mere 20 years old, drowned in a swamp while attempting to flee in his heavy armor. Yet, the real catastrophe wasn't the defeat itself, but what ensued. Without a clear successor, Hungary plunged into civil war. Two factions, Ferdinand of Habsburg and John Zapolya, vied for the crown. While they squabbled over power, Suleiman acted decisively. In 1541, Buda, Hungary's 1,000-year-old capital, fell not through battle, but through deception. The Ottomans invited Hungarian leaders to peace talks, only to take them hostage. The city capitulated without a fight. A painful lesson emerged. Sometimes, wars are won not by swords, but by the betrayal of trust. By then, Hungary had ceased to be a unified nation. It lay torn into 3 fragments, like a piece of shredded paper. The northwestern part went to the Habsburgs. The central region, including Buda, became Ottoman territory. The eastern part, Transylvania, transformed into a puppet state, paying tribute to Istanbul while maintaining a facade of autonomy. This was more than just a territorial division. It was an operation to sever the soul of a nation. Over 11 years, from 1541 to 1552, the Ottomans consolidated their control. Timisoara fell in July 1552. Szolnok surrendered without a fight, as its garrison troops simply fled at the sight of the immense Ottoman army. An additional 25 Hungarian fortresses crumbled like chess pieces. By September 1552, the Ottoman summer campaign had been a resounding triumph. Only one obstacle remained between them and the complete subjugation of northern Hungary: Eger Castle. Why was Eger so crucially important? At first glance, it appeared to be merely a small fortress nestled in the hills. But consider a 15th-century map. Eger occupied a strategically vital position. To its north lay Kassa, a hub for silver and gold mining, a vast source of royal revenue. To its west was the road to Vienna. Should Eger fall, the Ottomans would not only acquire wealth, but also gain an ideal logistical route for an assault on the heart of Europe. Qasim Ahmed Pasha, the Sultan's second vizier, fully understood this. He had crushed every fortress in his path northward. Veszprém, Drezhely, Széchenyi, all had fallen. He commanded 40,000 elite troops from Rumelia and Anatolia. He possessed 16 massive cannons, zarbuzans, capable of firing stone projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds. He also had 150 smaller artillery pieces. He even brought 2,000 camels to transport timber for siege constructions. On the other side, standing on Eger's ramparts, Captain István Dobó commanded 2,000 individuals. The siege would last 39 days. What transpired during those 39 days would become legendary. But was it a miracle or sheer skill? Continue watching to find out. Let me clarify something. István Dobó was not a military mastermind.
He wasn't a fabled hero destined for conquest. He was merely a minor nobleman, born around 1500, who grew up in a fragmented Hungary and chose to align himself with the Habsburgs during the post-Mohács power struggle. However, one quality distinguished Dobó. He was a man who prepared meticulously. When he was appointed commander of Eger Castle in 1549, Dobó didn't celebrate. He surveyed the crumbling walls and grasped a harsh truth. The Ottomans would come, not might come, but would come. And when they appeared, no one would save Eger except those defending it. From 1549 to 1552, Dobó worked tirelessly. He wasn't the kind of leader who would shout from the city walls or stir people with fiery speeches. Instead, he was the meticulous sort, someone who personally counted every bag of wheat in the stores and inspected every cannon, intimately aware of the exact amount of gunpowder needed for a siege lasting 30 or 50 days. He recruited 6 German artillerists, not due to immense wealth, but because he understood that in contemporary warfare, technology outweighed valor. He had even overseen the construction of wooden fortifications in Szolnok, 100 kilometers to the south, establishing an additional line of defense. When Szolnok ultimately fell in 1552, he didn't descend into despair. Rather, he learned crucial lessons from the setback. However, Dobó's most critical decisions weren't about weapons or fortifications, but about people. News of the approaching behemoth Ottoman army sent a wave of panic through the villagers surrounding Eger. They fled, not from the region entirely, but into the castle. Hundreds, men, women, and children, streamed into Eger seeking refuge. Any other commander might have turned them away, deeming it madness to feed more mouths during a siege. Dobó, however, saw things differently. He flung open the gates and welcomed them. Why? Because he perceived them not as a burden, but as a vital resource. Every pair of hands could carry stones, every woman could boil water, every child could deliver messages. In defensive warfare, no one is useless. There are only those who haven't yet been assigned the right task. Among his trusted circle was a young man Dobó held in high regard, Gergely Bornemisa. Bornemisa was 26 years old in 1552, an educated Lutheran who seemed ill-suited for military service, yet possessed a rare gift. He didn't just understand how to use explosives, he delved into their chemistry and mechanics, figuring out how to transform gunpowder into a weapon the enemy had never seen. Dobó placed Bornemisa in command of 250 infantrymen. More significantly, he granted Bornemisa the liberty to experiment, create, and innovate. This decision proved pivotal in saving Eger. In early September 1552, as scouts reported the 40,000-strong Ottoman army approaching with 16 massive cannons and 150 artillery pieces, Dobó gathered everyone in the castle courtyard. This wasn't an inspiring address. It was a stark, honest proposal. According to Géza Gardonyi's novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, which drew from historical records, Dobó stated, "For those more concerned with their own skin than the nation's destiny, the gate remains open. I need men. Better a few lions than a multitude of rabbits. Let those who tremble at the storm's approach depart before I say anything more. For we must swear to defend this castle. If anyone breaks that oath, they will not face God after death." No one left. Not because they were fearless, but because Dobó offered them something more profound than the hope of victory. He gave them a compelling reason to fight. On September 9th, 1552, the Ottomans arrived, initiating 39 of the most harrowing days in Hungarian history. To grasp the events that followed, one must first comprehend the Ottoman Empire's command structure and its inherent flaw. Qasim Ahmed Pasha was the senior commander, leading 2/3 of the forces, approximately 27,000 men.
Yet Ali Pasha of Buda possessed genuine strategic brilliance. Ali understood artillery. He commanded only 4 large cannons directly, but he positioned them with deadly precision, focusing fire on the weakest points of the walls. Ahmed and Ali harbored mutual animosity, rivaling each other over tactics, glory, and who would receive credit when Eger inevitably fell. Observing this from the walls, Dobo recognized it as the enemy's first vulnerability. The initial week passed eerily quietly, which was perhaps the most unsettling aspect. The Ottomans were in no rush to attack. They established their camp, dug trenches, and systematically prepared their siege equipment. Ahmed Pasha wasn't impulsive. He had witnessed too many failed sieges due to premature assaults. He aimed to do everything correctly. However, this methodical approach afforded Dobo crucial time to organize the defense, assign roles, and transform frightened civilians into a cohesive defensive force. He divided the castle into sectors, each led by a trusted officer: Gaspar Ptah, Gergely Bornemisa, Istvan Zalai, and Janos Figeti. Each was responsible for their specific section of the wall. Each knew that if their section fell, the entire castle would follow. Women were organized into teams. Some constantly boiled water in colossal cauldrons, others prepared bandages and tended to wounds, and still others carried ammunition and stones to the walls. The castle became a singular organism, every part supporting the others. On September 16th, after a week of tense anticipation, the bombardment began. Imagine the thunderous sound: 16 zarbuzans and 150 smaller cannons firing simultaneously. Cannonballs, each weighing more than an adult man, hurtled through the air at terrifying speeds, slamming into stone, wood, and flesh. Explosions reverberated like unceasing thunder. Dust permeated everything. People struggled to hear, breathe, or think. For 12 days, from September 17th to 28th, the bombardment relentlessly continued. Nearly 12,000 cannonballs struck Eger, yet those that didn't fully penetrate remained embedded in the walls, silent testaments to the destructive power the defenders had faced. The fortifications sustained extensive harm. The outer wall, which was defended by officers such as Boromesha, Gyula, and Efigoda, among others, suffered critical damage. Cracks appeared, and fragments of stone detached themselves. Sections of the walls began to crumble in various places. However, as cannons roared above ground, a different kind of conflict raged beneath the surface. Both adversaries were proficient in tunneling tactics. They dug tunnels beneath the enemy's walls, reinforced them with timber, and then ignited the supports to cause a collapse from above. Ottoman sappers initiated their digging from their trenches, gradually advancing toward Eger's foundations. Yet, one crucial fact eluded their knowledge. Eger was constructed upon the remnants of an ancient stone fortress, which had, in turn, replaced an even older earthen fortification, possibly erected by the Huns. Consequently, Eger's foundations were more robust than any fortress the Ottomans had ever besieged. The stone there was not merely hard, it was thick, deeply set, and nearly impenetrable. Additionally, Dobo possessed individuals adept at listening. Hungarian miners pressed their ears to the ground, detecting digging sounds from below, then burrowed to intercept and capture the tunnels. They clashed underground in hand-to-hand combat amidst complete darkness, employing daggers and bare hands, never witnessing each other's faces. All Ottoman tunneling attempts proved futile. This point warrants emphasis, as it showcases Dobo's strategic foresight. He didn't merely stockpile weapons and provisions. He prepared for every conceivable type of assault the Ottomans might employ. Tunnels were a standard Ottoman siege tactic, so Dobo organized counter-tunnels. Artillery bombardments were anticipated, leading him to accumulate stones from damaged walls for retaliatory projectiles. Scaling ladders were inevitable, prompting him to establish teams to douse attackers with boiling substances. This set Dobo apart from other commanders. He didn't merely hope for the best. He readied himself for every possibility, and then he prepared for the absolute worst-case scenarios. On September 29th, the feast day of St. Michael, Ahmed Pasha concluded that enough was enough. 12 days of bombardment had severely damaged the walls. It was time for a full-scale assault. What ensued was one of the fiercest engagements of the 16th century.
The Ottomans simultaneously attacked from multiple directions. Thousands of janissaries, the Sultan's elite troops, surged forward with scaling ladders. They harbored no fear of death, having been trained from youth to perceive dying in battle as the pinnacle of honor. They shouted, "Allah Akbar," and advanced like an unstoppable tide. But they were unprepared for what awaited them at the summit. For 2 weeks, Gergely Bornemisa had been developing weaponry the Ottomans had never encountered.
Primitive grenades, clay pots filled with gunpowder, nails, and metal shards with burning fuses. Barrel-sized bombs large enough to incapacitate 10 people simultaneously. And his most audacious invention, a massive watermill wheel, packed with gunpowder and nails, ignited and then rolled down a hill into the densely packed ranks of the Ottomans. The spectacle must have been horrifying. A colossal blazing wheel, trudging down the incline with increasing momentum, exploding amidst the multitude ascending the ladders. Those nearby were torn apart by shrapnel, while others were crushed by the wheel itself. Panic spread like wildfire. But that was not all. As the Ottomans reached the top of the ladders, they confronted the women of Eger. History tends to exaggerate the role of women in warfare, but in Eger, their role was unequivocally real. Not because they wielded swords, although Bertalan Sekli's renowned painting depicts this.
Rather, it was because they transformed ordinary household items into weapons. Boiling water from cauldrons, molten pitch from barrels, scorching lead from melting pots, stones from broken walls. The women poured, hurled, and pushed all of this down upon the siege ladders. An Ottoman soldier would ascend with hope, only to be met at the top by a woman wielding a bucket of boiling water, leading to the most agonizing death. Contemporary accounts substantiate this. The Italian diplomat Girolamo Martinelli wrote of these scenes not as legend, but as brutal fact. The women of Eger, including Kata Dobo, possibly a relative of the captain, actively participated in the defense, not by choice, but because they had no other option. The Battle of September 29th lasted the entire day. At one point, the Ottomans breached the old gate tower. Janissaries poured inside, secured positions, and began firing upon the defenders from within the castle.
This was typically the moment most sieges concluded. Once the enemy penetrates, all hope is lost. But Dobo remained composed. He stood on the shrine bastion and commanded that all the largest cannons be aimed at the old gate tower, where Ottoman and Hungarian soldiers were engaged in close-quarters combat. Officers protested. "Firing there will kill our own men." Dobo calmly retorted, "It is better to kill 10 of our men than to lose the entire castle." The cannons fired. The tower collapsed, burying both Ottomans and Hungarians. But the position was retaken, and after brutal hand-to-hand combat amidst the debris, the defenders not only repelled the Ottomans, but even pushed beyond the walls into their trenches, driving them back to their camps. The assault on September 29th was unsuccessful. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers had fallen, yet 30,000 still remained, poised for another attack. This incident illuminated a core aspect of Dobo's leadership, his willingness to make incredibly tough choices. Ordering fire upon one's own troops is a burden commanders carry for life. However, Dobo clearly grasped a critical element of defensive strategy. Excessive sentimentality spells ruin. Saving 10 fighters at that moment would have meant sacrificing 2,000. The loss of the tower would lead to the loss of the castle, and losing the castle would mean losing all of northern Hungary. Hence, he made that formidable decision. His soldiers recognized this. They understood they were following a man prepared to do whatever it took for survival. Such a leader might not be adored, but they are trusted. In war, trust holds far greater value. The psychological impact on the Ottoman forces should not be underestimated. They dedicated all their might to the Eger assault on St. Michael's Day. A full-scale offensive, breaches at multiple points, overwhelming power. All were repelled. They weren't just halted, they were driven back with immense casualties. For an army accustomed to victory, to seeing one fortress after another fall, this was inconceivable. How could these individuals, outnumbered and outgunned, defending damaged walls, continue to fight? The answer, elusive to the Ottomans, was straightforward. Eger's defenders knew precisely what they were fighting for. The Ottomans battled for the Sultan's glory, for conquest, for imperial expansion. The people inside Eger, however, fought for their children, their homes, for their very existence as a people. This distinction between battling for abstract glory and fighting for survival became an invisible barrier the Ottomans couldn't surmount. October arrived, ushering in unexpected shifts. Hungarian autumn typically unfolds gradually, but in 1552 it struck suddenly. Temperatures plummeted, nights turned frosty, and then the rains began. Not mere rain, but downpours that transformed the earth into mud and soaked everything completely. They seeped through every tent canvas. For the defenders within the stone castle, this was merely an inconvenience. Yet, for the 40,000 Ottoman soldiers camped outside, primarily in cloth tents, it became a living nightmare. Their uniforms remained perpetually damp, food rotted and molded, but even worse, diseases started to spread. Dysentery first emerged in the overflowing military camps, where tens of thousands shared the same water sources and huddled in cramped quarters. Illnesses spread like wildfire. Soldiers began succumbing not to Hungarian swords, but to their own intestinal ailments. Day by day, the sick numbered in the tens, then hundreds. However, supply issues proved even more dire. The Ottomans had brought vast quantities of gunpowder and cannonballs, but after 20 days of continuous bombardment, supplies began to dwindle. And not just once. Each cannonball had to be carved from marble, a process that took hours. Production couldn't keep pace with consumption. Consequently, Ahmed Pasha's massive cannons fell silent for over a week, awaiting ammunition. The terrifying artillery advantage of the Ottomans, their greatest strength, was crippled by a simple logistics failure. And then there was food. Rice rations grew smaller, and rumors of corruption proliferated. Officers were allegedly selling food to soldiers for profit. Whether these rumors were true or not, they eroded morale. Soldiers didn't fear dying in battle, but they detested the feeling of being cheated by their own commanders. The atmosphere in the Ottoman camp shifted from confidence to doubt, then to despair. How many soldiers had they already lost? 8,000? 10,000? And for what?
To capture one small, insignificant castle? Meanwhile, conditions inside Eger were also far from easy. The defenders had lost roughly 400 to 600 men, almost a third of their original fighting force. Each bastion now had fewer defenders, and everyone was exhausted. They fought all day and kept watch all night for 3 continuous weeks. Sleep was a luxury, and food supplies were dwindling. Gunpowder, although carefully hoarded by Dobo, was also not limitless, and everyone knew that another major assault could break them. On October 11th, that assault occurred. This time, Ahmed Pasha committed everything. No reserves, no intricate tactics, just brute force. Tens of thousands of soldiers simultaneously attacked every point along the perimeter, hoping to breach the defenses somewhere. For 2 days, October 11th and 12th, Eger endured hell. Ottomans scaled ladders from all directions simultaneously. Bloody skirmishes erupted along every section of the wall. There was no safe place. All soldiers, civilians, women, even children old enough to carry stones, joined the battle. Banquiza used his last grenades. Women poured the last buckets of boiling water. Cannons fired until their barrels became too hot to touch. Yet, the Ottomans pressed on. In relentless succession, the Janissaries swarmed up the ladders. These were no conscripts or reluctant fighters. These were elite warriors, forged by a lifetime of rigorous training. They advanced without hesitation, stepping over fallen comrades, as new ladders instantly replaced any that were knocked aside. When boiling water claimed a dozen lives, 24 more immediately pressed forward. On the northeastern bastion, the defenders exhausted their supply of throwing stones, resorting to dismantling sections of their own fortifications for additional projectiles. By the southern wall, the women had no more water to heat, so they poured scalding oil on the attackers instead, a more dangerous but far more destructive tactic. At the western gate, Bornea's final barrel bomb killed 30 Ottomans, but also damaged the gate itself, necessitating urgent repairs. Across the battlefield, the defense became a masterclass in improvisation.
Broken cart planks became shields, shattered pottery transformed into missiles. Even dirt from the ground was scooped up and hurled at the Ottoman faces to momentarily blind them. Every object, every substance, every desperate idea was weaponized. This depicted battle-worn despair. Not the dramatic, cinematic despair of heroic last stands, but the grinding, exhausting, soul-crushing despair of individuals who had been fighting for weeks and knew they could not afford a single moment of respite. On October 13th, following another unsuccessful assault, a notable shift occurred within the Ottoman encampment. An eerie silence descended, but it was a silence born not of preparation, but of profound desperation. Ottoman officers openly began to quarrel. Ahmet blamed Ali, and Ali blamed Ahmet. Both pointed fingers at subordinate officers, who in turn blamed the soldiers, who were too fatigued to care who was at fault. This wasn't merely a disagreement over strategy. It was a total breakdown of unit cohesion. When Ahmet ordered yet another attack, some units wavered. When Ali positioned artillery, other commanders questioned the efficacy of further bombardment. The unified Ottoman war machine fragmented, and then, on October 17th, rumors began to circulate throughout the Ottoman camp. Rumors that would evolve into legend. Turkish soldiers, witnessing the Hungarians fight with seemingly superhuman strength, started telling tales. They claimed the Hungarians drank bull's blood, which explained their immense power. They had seen Hungarian beards stained red with liquid during the fighting. In truth, it was red wine. But the Muslim Ottoman soldiers, who abstained from alcohol, were unaware of this. They whispered that the Hungarian women were witches, capable of boiling water through magic. They believed the castle itself was enchanted, shielded by ancient spirits. Of course, all of this was nonsense. Yet in warfare, truth holds less sway than what people choose to believe. And when an army starts to believe it is fighting something supernatural, its will crumbles. This is the real story behind the blood custom legend. The Hungarian defenders, depleted and terrified after days of bombardment, needed something to bolster their spirits. Doba brought wine from the castle cellars, not for intoxication, but to grant the frightened men a fleeting moment of courage. Medieval people believed wine possessed fortifying properties. Whether this was medically accurate is irrelevant. The psychological impact was paramount. The soldiers, trembling with fear, drank the wine and felt warmth spread through their bodies. For a moment, they felt strong again. They returned to the walls with renewed vigor. The Ottoman observers, witnessing this transformation and noticing the red wine stains, created their own explanation: magical blood. But the true magic wasn't in the wine. It was in their belief. The Hungarian defenders believed they could continue to fight, and so they did. The Ottoman attackers believed they were fighting something unnatural, and thus their confidence faltered. This reveals a fundamental truth about human psychology in extreme circumstances. What we believe about our situation matters more than objective facts. The objective reality was that the Eger defenders were starving, exhausted, low on supplies, and outnumbered 20-1. Yet they believed they could hold out for one more day, and they did. And then they believed they could hold out for another day, and again, they did. Meanwhile, the objective reality for the Ottomans was that they still held overwhelming numerical superiority, ample supplies, and the capacity to continue the siege for months. But they believed they were fighting something undefeatable, and so they began to break. On October 17th, another massive assault was launched. The Ottomans attacked the walls with desperate fury. This was no longer tactics, it was raw emotion. Commanders who had lost thousands of men wanted something, anything, to justify those deaths. The soldiers, witnessing their comrades perish, yearned for retribution. The assault that day was less about capturing Eger and more about avoiding the feeling that all the prior deaths had been pointless. The fighting on that particular day was the most brutal of the entire siege, devolving into close-quarters combat on the ramparts. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand, often tumbling from the walls together. The besieged were so utterly exhausted they could barely lift their weapons, while the attackers, equally frustrated, took reckless risks. At one point, continuous shelling caused a section of the southern wall to partially collapse. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the Ottomans would finally breach the defenses. They surged towards the gap like water through a dam's crack. However, Istvan Dobo was there, not barking orders from a safe distance, but personally defending the breach with a sword in hand. At 50 years old, an age considered elderly for most men in the 15th century, he fought with the vigor of a young warrior. This wasn't due to exceptional swordsmanship, which he lacked, but because his mere presence meant far more than his fighting prowess. Seeing their commander standing firm in the breach, refusing to retreat, the defenders discovered strength they hadn't known they possessed.
They rallied around him, forming a human barrier at the point of collapse. The breach became a slaughterhouse. So many Ottoman bodies accumulated that the assailants had to clamber over the dead to reach the defenders. The October 17th attack spanned from dawn until late night. When it finally concluded, both sides were so spent that soldiers simply collapsed where they stood. There was no triumphant celebration among the defenders, nor an organized retreat for the attackers, only mutual exhaustion. That night, in the Ottoman command tent, Ahmed Pasha confronted the harsh reality. His army had suffered between 8,000 and 10,000 casualties, possibly more. Loss calculations in 15th century warfare were notoriously imprecise. Disease spread unchecked through the camp, supplies were critically low, and morale had evaporated. The castle showed no signs of surrender. He faced a choice: prolong the siege into winter, watching his army slowly dwindle from illness and desertion, or withdraw now, with an army still largely intact. On October 18, 1552, Ahmed Pasha ordered a retreat. There was no dramatic final battle, no heroic gesture. The Ottomans simply gathered their belongings and departed, leaving thousands of their dead in shallow graves around the castle. The weary Hungarian defenders stood on the walls, watching the vast army slowly vanish to the south. Then, as the last Ottoman disappeared from sight, everyone in the castle began to comprehend they had survived. No one cheered in jubilation. They were too weary to celebrate. Some simply sat down where they stood. Others wept, not from joy, but from the immense relief of shedding 3 weeks of accumulated terror. 300 defenders had perished, 200 were wounded, many never to fight again. The castle lay in ruins. Most bastions were severely damaged.
Food was almost gone, gunpowder nearly depleted. If the Ottomans had returned after a week's rest, Eger would have fallen in a single day. But they did not return. Not because they couldn't, they still had 30,000 soldiers, but because something in their spirit had broken. Eger proved that the Ottomans were not invincible. And once the myth of invincibility is shattered, it can never be fully restored. We must grasp the psychological impact on both sides during these final days, for the siege of Eger was ultimately decided not by weaponry or tactics, but by human endurance pushed to its absolute limits. Inside the castle, the defenders held on purely through sheer willpower. Food rations were so meager that people experienced constant hunger, though they weren't starving to death thanks to earlier preparations. Yet, this persistent hunger drained their strength and clouded their minds. Sleep deprivation was even worse. Maintaining a 24/7 combat watch for weeks without dangerous exhaustion is impossible. In such conditions, people begin to make errors. They mistake allies for enemies, fall asleep at their posts, and their reactions slow, making them vulnerable in battle. Dobo recognized this danger, constantly rotating defenders to ensure no one was on watch for more than a few hours at a time. But with only 2,000 men guarding the entire castle perimeter, even rotations couldn't provide adequate rest. The psychological toll was likely heavier than the physical exhaustion. Imagine living under continuous bombardment for weeks, the ceaseless roar of cannons, buildings crumbling without warning. At any moment, a cannonball could pierce the roof and kill you in your sleep. Such prolonged stress breaks people, both visibly and invisibly. Some defenders developed what we would now call combat trauma: uncontrollable tremors, an inability to speak, a vacant stare into nothingness. In the 15th century, there were no terms for this. They simply called it battle-struck. Dobo could not afford to dismiss these men. He needed every able warrior. Consequently, the injured soldiers persisted in combat, their physical and mental states deteriorating daily. The female defenders encountered additional obstacles. Many were mothers with children sheltered within the castle walls. They fought on the ramparts, their thoughts consumed by their offspring hiding in the cellars. Some, heavily pregnant, continued to haul stones and boil water, nurturing their unborn children amidst the turmoil. Historical accounts offer only fleeting glimpses of these challenges. Yet, one can try to envision the profundity of such circumstances. Late-term pregnant women ascending stairs with buckets of scalding water, fully aware that a single misstep could result in a double tragedy. Children experienced the siege in ways almost unimaginable to us today.
Medieval childhood itself was harsh, characterized by high mortality rates, food scarcity, and perilous living conditions. The siege, however, piled layers of unbearable psychological trauma onto this. Children witnessed their parents' demise. They observed bodies torn apart by cannon fire. They heard screams that formed the fabric of nightmares. Some children were pressed into service, tasked with delivering messages or small provisions. Others cowered in cellars, terrified and bewildered. Perhaps the elderly suffered the most. Incapable of fighting or performing arduous labor, many felt utterly useless. Nevertheless, some insisted on contributing, dragging themselves to the walls with fierce determination to hurl stones, often succumbing to exhaustion in the attempt. Others quietly starved themselves, ceding their rations to younger combatants. Such acts of self-sacrifice are seldom recorded in historical chronicles, but they undoubtedly occurred. They always did during sieges. Meanwhile, in the Ottoman encampment, different but equally devastating calamities began to surface. The Ottoman army was not a monolithic entity. It was a patchwork of diverse groups with disparate motives. The Janissaries fought for Suleiman the Magnificent and Islam, their morale generally remaining high throughout the campaign. However, the provincial forces from Anatolia and Rumelia were essentially conscripted peasants yearning for home. Mercenaries fought for payment, and when compensation became erratic, as it always does during prolonged campaigns, their loyalty waned. These divergent motivations created fissures within the Ottoman ranks. Janissaries held provincial troops in disdain for their perceived combat inadequacy. Provincial forces resented the Janissaries for their superior equipment and provisions. Mercenaries harbored animosity towards all, seeing themselves dying for a foreign empire. The rivalry and misunderstanding between Ahmed and Ali Pasha only exacerbated the situation. Soldiers were frequently confused about whose orders to follow when their commanders contradicted each other. A logistical breakdown accelerated this disintegration. When rice rations were reduced, soldiers accused officers of corruption, sometimes with justification. It was a common practice in medieval armies for officers to hoard food while soldiers starved. Whether this occurred at Eger is less significant than the soldiers' conviction that it did. This belief poisoned morale more effectively than any Hungarian weapon. Disease transformed the Ottoman camp into a death trap. Dysentery kills slowly and agonizingly. Victims endure days of debilitating cramps, dehydration, and weakness. They become too incapacitated to fight, but not sick enough to be sent home. Thus, they languished in their tents, spreading infection among their comrades and creating ever-widening circles of sickness throughout the camp. Lacking a modern understanding of sanitation, 16th-century armies could not prevent the spread of illness. They didn't comprehend how to quarantine sick soldiers. They were unaware that contaminated water sources caused dysentery. They couldn't grasp why diseases erupted in some camps but not others. To them, illness seemed random, almost supernatural, making it even more psychologically crippling. By early October, the Ottoman camp likely harbored thousands of sick soldiers. While not always quickly fatal, dysentery renders its victims incapacitated. This presented commanders with a brutal dilemma: send sick soldiers home, thereby reducing the effective fighting force, or keep them in camp, where they would infect others. Ahmed and Ali apparently chose the latter, indicating either strategic incompetence or a desperate reluctance to admit the campaign's failure. The weather added another layer of suffering. October chills in Hungary can be merciless. Nights with temperatures hovering around freezing, wind piercing through tents,
led to symptoms of hypothermia among soldiers without adequate shelter. Frostbite appeared on extremities, and respiratory illnesses spread. The combination of cold, disease, and malnutrition created a perfect storm of human misery. Under these circumstances, the assault on October 17th was no longer truly about capturing Eger. It was about salvation. The Ottoman commanders realized they could not sustain the siege much longer. They needed a victory, any victory, to justify their retreat. A successful assault would have ratified their capture of Eger. A failed one would have proven Eger's resilience regardless, allowing them to retreat with a shred of dignity. Yet the attack faltered not negligibly, but decisively. The Ottoman forces expended every last resource against Eger, suffering a complete repulse. This debacle eliminated all remaining options save a dishonorable withdrawal. On October 18th, the decision to retreat undoubtedly brought immense relief to the ordinary soldiers, who had endured 39 days of hellish conditions. For commanders like Ahmed Pasha, however, the retreat signified professional disgrace. He had led the second-largest Ottoman army of 1552, failing to seize a minor fortress defended by 2,000 men. Such a failure was a career-ender. The withdrawal itself showcased the unwavering discipline of the Ottomans. Even in defeat, they avoided panic and did not abandon their equipment. Everything was methodically packed. They retreated in perfect order, even burying their fallen comrades where feasible. Despite their diminished morale, they remained a professional army capable of combat. Nevertheless, their defeat stemmed less from superior enemy forces and more from their intrinsic limitations, logistical challenges, disease, inclement weather, and, most crucially, the realization that some strongholds are impregnable, regardless of the number of soldiers thrown against them. For the defenders observing from Eger's ramparts, the Ottoman retreat must have appeared surreal. For 39 days they had anticipated their demise. Each dawn brought fresh assaults. Every night was haunted by terror of the coming day. Then, unexpectedly and inexplicably, the enemy vanished. The psychological impact would have been profound. From peak stress to sudden alleviation, from constant mortal peril to relative safety, from utter hopelessness to unforeseen salvation. Many defenders likely experienced what we would now call psychological shock, emotional numbness, an inability to process events, a detachment from reality. But there was no time to dwell on trauma. The castle was in ruins, its walls demanding immediate repair before the weather inflicted further damage. Bodies needed burial to prevent disease, the wounded required treatment, and children needed nourishment. The harsh realities of life demanded attention, despite the psychological and physical exhaustion. This is a facet history often overlooks. Victory doesn't equate to immediate restoration. It signifies survival, followed by a vast amount of unglamorous, grueling labor. The glorious triumph of Eger was immediately succeeded by weeks of clearing corpses, mending fortifications, treating infected wounds, and striving to re-establish some semblance of normalcy. And an unspoken thought hung over everything, a question no one dared voice but everyone pondered. What if they return? News of Eger's defense spread across Europe with unprecedented speed. Dispatches from the front lines were printed in Vienna, Prague, and Venice. People were incredulous. 2,000 individuals had vanquished 40,000. How was this conceivable? King Ferdinand, who had declined to send reinforcements when Istvan Doba pleaded for aid, now hastened to bestow rewards and honors. He granted Doba the Transylvanian towns of Dava and Samishwar. He appointed Doba as voivode, essentially the governor of all Transylvania, one of the kingdom's most influential positions. Gurgly Bornia was given command of Eger Castle. At 26 years old, he became one of the youngest and most esteemed generals in the Hungarian army. However, Bornia's story did not conclude happily. In 1554, merely 2 years after Eger, Bornia fell into an Ottoman ambush. He was captured alive and transported to Constantinople. The Ottomans understood his worth. They offered him a proposition. Disclose the secrets of Eger's defenses, and you will be free, wealthy, and respected. Refuse, and you will die. Bornia refused.
In 1555, he was hanged in Constantinople at the age of 29. Why? Why would a young man with his entire life ahead choose death over betrayal? This is a question each generation must answer for itself. Yet perhaps the answer lies in Bornia's experiences at Eger. He witnessed what transpires when people unite for a cause greater than themselves. He saw women pouring boiling water from the walls, unwilling to let their children live under occupation. He saw Doba direct artillery fire at his own soldiers to save the castle. And he understood that some values transcend individual survival. When his Ottoman interrogators offered him his life in exchange for intelligence, Bornia understood the ramifications of his compliance. Every future siege would employ these secrets against Hungarian defenders. Every castle that fell due to his treachery would burden his conscience. Every child enslaved, every woman captured, every man slain. All would be consequences of his choice to prioritize his own life over the lives of others. Therefore, he chose death, not because he desired to die, but because he could not live as the man who had betrayed everything Eger represented. This lonely decision was made in a Constantinople prison cell, unseen by anyone who might have admired his bravery, with no guarantee that his refusal would ever be known. This exemplifies genuine heroism. It's not the glorious battlefield heroism of grand assaults, but rather the quiet courage of prioritizing principles over survival when no one is watching. Dobo's life post-Eger was a political tragedy. In 1556, when Transylvanian magnates planned to secede from Habsburg rule, Dobo was imprisoned under suspicion of involvement. He was innocent and eventually freed, but trust had been shattered. The man who had saved Hungary was distrusted by the very people he served. He passed away in 1572 in Seredne at the age of 70, largely forgotten, without a lavish funeral or a monument, just a simple headstone marking the resting place of a man who saved a nation, and Eger itself. The castle was renovated and fortified, yet in 1596, 44 years after the Great Victory, Eger still fell. And this wasn't due to an overwhelming army, but to betrayal. 7,000 defenders, primarily foreign mercenaries, surrendered to Sultan Mehmed III with little resistance. Why did this happen? The reason was their lack of what the 1552 defenders possessed, a far more compelling motivation to fight than mere monetary reward. Eger remained under Ottoman control for 91 years. Churches became mosques. The castle was rebuilt and strengthened by Turkish engineers, and a minaret was erected that still stands today, the northernmost minaret ever built by the Ottoman Empire. In 1687, Eger was finally liberated by combined Austro-Hungarian forces, but the city was forever changed. A generation raised under Ottoman rule held completely different memories, allegiances, and aspirations. So, did that 1552 victory truly matter? If Eger fell anyway 44 years later, were those 39 days even significant? The answer is yes, because 44 years is a substantial period in history. It represents 2 full generations of people growing up in freedom. It's 44 years during which revenue from the mines in Koseg financed the Habsburg defense, not the Ottoman treasury. It's 44 years for Vienna to prepare for impending sieges. And, even more importantly, it's 44 years during which Hungarians had their own story to tell. A story of how they endured. A story of how ordinary people became heroes. A story that no sultan could erase. Eger's strategic importance extended far beyond the fortress itself. The victory demonstrated that Ottoman expansion was not inevitable. Other fortresses, inspired by Eger's example, found the courage to resist. The psychological shift was immense, moving from the belief that the Ottomans were unbeatable to the idea, the Ottomans can be defeated if one acts intelligently and never gives up. This psychological paradigm shift influenced European military thought for generations. Eger became a model in defensive warfare. Military theorists analyzed Dobo's tactics. Engineers studied the castle's fortifications. Commanders understood that numbers aren't everything. Preparation, leadership, and morale hold far greater significance. This story also became a cultural emblem of Hungarian identity. In the 19th century, As Hungary struggled for its distinctiveness within the Austro-Hungarian Empire, writers and artists revisited Eger as a symbol of Hungarian resilience. Géza Gardoni's 1899 novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, was more than historical fiction. It was a message to contemporary Hungarians. Look at what your ancestors achieved. You can do it too. The novel was adapted into a spectacular 1968 film, one of the most expensive films ever made in Hungary. It is still aired annually on Hungarian television. Every generation of Hungarian children grows up with this narrative. It shapes their understanding of national character, not as victims of history, but as people who faced impossible odds and persevered. And not just Hungarians. The story of Eger has inspired countless narratives about ordinary people confronting insurmountable obstacles. It has shaped our perception of defense, courage, and what people can achieve when united. But perhaps the most profound lesson from Eger isn't about war. It's about how to manage seemingly insurmountable challenges in our own lives. We all have moments when we face our own 40,000 Ottomans. Perhaps it's a medical diagnosis, a financial collapse, a personal loss, or simply the feeling that the world is too vast and we are too small to make a difference. In such times, remember, he didn't win because he was stronger. He won because he was better prepared. He didn't win because he was fearless. He won because he did what was necessary. Even confronting fear, bear in mind, Borneo, Daba lacked the weaponry of the Ottomans, compelling him to devise arms they had never encountered. When brute force is not an option, creativity becomes your strongest asset. Recall the women of Eger? They weren't trained for combat, yet discovered ways to contribute. They transformed ordinary skills into critical tools for survival. You possess abilities you consider pedestrian, but in the appropriate context, they can be extraordinary. And above all, understand that 2,000 individuals did not triumph over 40,000 simply by being the strongest. They triumphed because they refused to yield. To battle for 39 consecutive days, enduring countless losses, witnessing walls crumble, constantly hearing cannon fire, and still persist in the fight. Such fortitude resides within everyone. Not the courage of isolated heroic acts, but the courage of unwavering endurance. The courage to awaken each morning and declare, "Today, I will last another day." Because that's how Eger was preserved, not through a singular miraculous event, but through 39 days of thousands of small decisions, each proclaiming, "We will not surrender." If 2,000 individuals could withstand 40,000 for 39 days, you can stand firm against whatever challenges you face today. Now let's revisit the question I posed initially. Was Eger's victory a miracle, luck, or strategy? The answer is all three, but not in the way you might assume. Yes, there was an element of luck. Autumn arrived prematurely. The Ottomans twice depleted their ammunition. Dysentery spread through their encampment, and such factors were entirely beyond István Doba's control. However, luck only favors those prepared to seize it. Had Doba not stockpiled food for 39 days, no amount of luck would have sufficed. Had Gurgly Borneo not experimented with explosives, inclement weather alone wouldn't have been enough. Had the civilians not been organized into efficient work teams, all the world's good fortune couldn't have saved Eger. And yes, a strategy was in place, but not the grand, genius strategy we often envision. Doba was no Hannibal or Napoleon. His tactics were straightforward: meticulous preparation of every detail, utilization of all available resources, and an unflagging refusal to surrender. This is an approach anyone can master. It's about diligence, patience, and flawlessly executing minor tasks until they culminate in something monumental. Yet the most crucial factor that transformed potential victory into reality cannot be gleaned from strategy manuals. The defenders understood something many commanders fail to grasp. In defense, morale surpasses weaponry. One can possess the sturdiest walls imaginable, but if the defenders lack conviction in their cause, those walls are useless. Conversely, one can have the weakest walls, but if the defenders are prepared to die for their beliefs, those walls become impregnable.
Doba achieved this by treating everyone, including civilians and women, as valuable participants. He didn't tell them to be silent and let the real soldiers do their job. He articulated, "This is your task, it is vital, and we need you." And people responded, not for monetary gain. The majority didn't receive any. Not because they expected to survive. Most knew they would likely perish. They responded because they finally felt a part of something larger than themselves. This is the first lesson from Eger. Leadership isn't knowing all the answers. It's about empowering people to feel that their contributions are essential. The second lesson. Innovation arises from desperation. Borneo didn't invent grenades and bombs because he was a genius. He invented them because he had no other option. Confronted by an enemy 20 times superior in number, one cannot fight in the conventional manner. One must discover something they haven't yet encountered. This is a lesson for anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. Don't attempt to mimic those who are more powerful than you. Find what you can do that they cannot. The third lesson. Diversity is strength. Eger's defenders were not homogeneous. They comprised professional soldiers, peasants, nobility, the poor, men and women, Lutherans and Catholics. In most armies of that era, such diversity would have been a weakness, but Doba transformed it into a strength by assigning everyone a role aligned with their skills. Women weren't asked to wield swords. They were asked to perform tasks they already excelled at: cooking, but now boiling water as a weapon; sewing, but now making powder bags; and caring, but now tending to the wounded. German artillerymen did what they were trained to do. Hungarian miners used their digging expertise for countermining. This is a lesson for any organization. Don't try to force everyone into a single mold. Identify their unique strengths and cultivate them. The fourth lesson, arguably the most vital. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are stacked against you. Borneo could have saved his life by revealing Eger's secrets, yet he chose death. Why? Not because he was fearless of death, but because he feared something greater than death, living as a betrayer of his convictions. When the Ottoman interrogators offered him his life in exchange for information, Borneo understood the implications of acquiescence. Each subsequent siege would leverage these vulnerabilities against the Hungarian defenders. Every fortress that fell due to his treachery would burden his conscience. Each child enslaved, every woman captured, every man slain, all directly attributable to his choice to prioritize his own life above all others. This is a lesson our contemporary society frequently overlooks. Not everything is open to compromise. There are principles worth upholding, even at significant personal cost. Sometimes, unwavering resolve, even in defeat, holds more weight than survival through capitulation. Eger teaches us that triumph isn't solely defined by winning an immediate conflict. Occasionally, it lies in crafting a narrative from which future generations can derive crucial insights. 5 centuries later, the tale of Eger endures. We continue to learn from the captains, engineers, and women defending its walls. This is a victory no sultan can erase. The lessons extend beyond individual bravery, encompassing collective endeavor. Eger illustrates the power of an entire community, not just its military, resisting. The castle endured not merely due to exceptional leadership, but because every single individual, irrespective of their station or role, contributed their utmost towards a shared objective. This stands in stark contrast to our modern inclination towards individualism. We often lionize isolated heroes, singular geniuses, unique leaders, and outstanding warriors. Yet the truth of Eger is more nuanced and profound. Victory was secured by 2,000 individuals performing unglamorous, exhausting tasks day after day, hauling stones, boiling water, keeping watch, repairing ramparts, tending wounds, preparing sustenance. These actions, individually mundane, together formed a colossal act of heroism. Consider the relevance to contemporary challenges: climate change, political polarization, economic disparity. These issues often appear insurmountable because we tend to seek individual solutions or singular saviors. However, Eger offers a different paradigm: collective action. Everyone contributes. sustaining effort over extended periods, despite fatigue and doubt. The siege also highlights the limitations of raw power. The Ottomans possessed every advantage: numerical superiority, advanced weaponry, extensive experience, and vast resources. They should have secured an easy victory. Their defeat reveals that brute force, when inflexible, lacking understanding of the adversary, and failing to maintain morale, is ultimately doomed to fail. This profoundly influences how we perceive conflicts at every level. In business, corporate behemoths with limitless resources sometimes lose to agile startups because sheer size breeds inflexibility. In politics, powerful movements collapse when they disconnect from the core beliefs that initially drew people to them. In our personal lives, we often try to overcome problems through sheer willpower, ignoring whether our approach is actually appropriate. D'Aubigné's brilliance wasn't in possessing abundant resources, but in optimally utilizing his very limited ones. He couldn't match the Ottoman firepower, so he focused on preparation, morale, and imaginative tactics. If you cannot conquer with superior force, triumph through superior efficiency. Finally, Eger imparts a crucial lesson on the interplay between physical and psychological warfare. The castle's physical defenses were undeniably important, but what ultimately broke the Ottoman siege was not just the resilience of the walls. It was the growing psychological certainty among the attackers that victory was unattainable. The Ottomans technically could have pressed on. They still held numerical superiority, but they had lost faith. Once stories began circulating among the soldiers about supernatural protectors and miraculous blood, the siege, in essence, concluded. The physical battle continued briefly, but the psychological one had already been lost. This unveils a profound insight. Belief shapes outcomes as powerfully as material conditions. The defenders believed they could hold out for one more day, and they did. The attackers ceased believing they could win, and therefore they couldn't. The same battlefield, the same weaponry, yet divergent beliefs led to dramatically different results. In your own personal struggles, this holds immense significance. Objective circumstances matter, but your conviction regarding those circumstances can matter more. If you believe a problem is insurmountable, you will approach it half-heartedly and prove yourself right. If you believe solutions exist, you will tirelessly search until you uncover them. The most profound lesson from Eger isn't about medieval siege warfare. It's about human potential when individuals unite for a common purpose, refuse to accept defeat, and maintain unwavering faith, even when logic dictates despair. This is precisely why this narrative resonates 5 centuries later. Because we all face our own sieges, and we all need to be reminded that the impossible becomes possible when ordinary people collectively achieve extraordinary feats. Today, you can still visit Eger Castle. Its walls still stand, rebuilt and reinforced, yet fundamentally the same walls that D'Aubigné and his people defended. You can wander along the ramparts where Bornemisza launched his grenades. You can gaze down from the Shrenov bastion, a position I defended, ordering cannons to fire at the ancient gate. And if you listen closely, each day at 3:52 p.m., you'll hear a cannon shot. This is Eger's daily remembrance. At the precise hour the 1552 siege began. The shot echoes, reminding everyone of the events that unfolded here. In the city, you can purchase Egri Bikover, or bull's blood, a robust red wine said to have granted Hungarian soldiers superhuman strength. While the legend itself is unfounded, the underlying truth is real. The wine offered frightened individuals a fleeting moment of courage, and sometimes that's all one needs. The tale of Eger has been recounted for centuries. The poet Sebastian Tino de Ludus wrote about it immediately after the siege. Mihaly Voroshmarty penned an epic poem in 1827. However, the most renowned version is Géza Gardoni's novel, Eclipse of the Crescent Moon, published in 1899. This book transcended historical fiction. It emerged during a time when Hungary sought to define its identity within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Gardoni implored his readers, "Consider what your ancestors achieved. They stood firm when all seemed lost. You can do the same." In 1968, the novel was adapted into a spectacular film, one of the most expensive in Hungarian history. It continues to be broadcast annually on Hungarian television. Every generation of Hungarian children grows up with this story, and its influence extends beyond Hungary. The Eger narrative has inspired countless accounts of ordinary people confronting impossible challenges. It has molded our understanding of defense, bravery, and the potential of collective human endeavor. Yet, perhaps Eger's most significant lesson isn't about warfare. It concerns facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles in your personal journey. We all encounter moments akin to Doba's thousands of Ottomans, perhaps a serious medical diagnosis, a financial setback, or a personal tragedy. It might simply be the feeling that the world is too vast and you are too insignificant to affect change. In such times, recall Doba. He triumphed not because of superior strength, but through meticulous preparation. He prevailed not from an absence of fear, but by acting despite it. Remember Bornemija? Lacking the Turks' weaponry, he innovated something entirely new. If you cannot compete with brute force, compete with ingenuity. Think of the women of Eger. Though untrained in combat, they discovered ways to contribute, transforming everyday skills into survival tools. You possess skills you deem mundane, yet in the right circumstances, they can prove extraordinary. Most importantly, remember that 2,000 individuals defeated 40,000 not due to their mightiest, but their refusal to yield. To fight for 39 consecutive days, to lose hundreds of warriors, to witness walls crumble, to endure the relentless roar of cannons, and still persist, this is the fortitude accessible to everyone. It's not the courage of isolated heroic acts, but the courage of unwavering persistence. The courage to awaken each day and declare, "Today, I will endure another day." For this is how Eger was saved, not by a single miraculous event, but by 39 days of thousands of small decisions, each echoing, "We will not surrender." And if 2,000 individuals could stand against 40,000 for 39 days, then you, too, can face whatever challenges confront you today. So, when you encounter your own formidable trial, whatever its nature, ask yourself, what would Doba do? How would I prepare? What resources would I utilize? Where would I find the strength? Then, act, day by day, decision by decision, one small act of courage at a time. Because that's how Eger was preserved, not by a single magical instant, but by 39 days of countless minor choices, each proclaiming, "We will not retreat." And if 2,000 people maintained their defense against 40,000 for 39 days, you can stand firm against any adversity. This encapsulates the message of Eger. This is why we continue to tell this story after 500 years.
And this is why, every day at 3:52 p.m., a cannon fires in Eger, reminding us that the impossible remains so only until someone makes it possible. If this narrative resonated with you, please leave a comment sharing the seemingly insurmountable challenges you face in your life. Let this community offer mutual support, much like the inhabitants of Eger supported each other on those walls in 1552. Subscribe to avoid missing other historical accounts of courage, strategy, and individuals overcoming unimaginable obstacles. And if you feel inclined, share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are stronger than they realize. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, history is not merely what transpired. It's also about what we learn to improve upon.